Alex Newman. He's been a guest on the program. This will be his second time on Black Talk Radio News. He has written about, the lies that were told that got the American public, that's you, to buy into the overthrow of this government on humanitarian grounds. Now, you think about today, this report that we've heard over the past couple of days when it occurred, the 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians being beheaded on a Libyan beach. That wasn't happening under Gaddafi now, was it? So what did Hillary Clinton help unleash? Of course, we've been reporting on it, but we want to get Mr. Newman's perspective as a writer, as a political commentator on that issue. We're going to take a break, and then when we come back, we should be speaking to Mr. Alex Newman. And welcome back. I do believe we have Mr. Newman, Mr. Alex Newman, writer, political analyst, commentator, joining us for the second time on Black Talk Radio News. Is that you, Mr. Newman?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks very much for having me, Mr. Reed.
All right. Thank you for joining us here today. I want to get right to the news, Alex. Of course, I know, you keep up with, geopolitical events that's happening all over the globe. And certainly you've heard the news about allegedly these 21 Coptic Egyptian Christians were beheaded by, I don't know if it's Al-Qaeda. I don't know if it's the ISIL, operating in Syria and Iraq. But, I mean, what do you think about that news? That happening in Libya? I don't think that would have happened under Muammar Gaddafi. But I brought you on, to talk about how we got into all of this or come to these events today by way of, people like Hillary Clinton, the Obama administration. But what were your initial thoughts when you heard the news, being that you had written about Libya, about these people being beheaded on this Libyan beach?
First of all, you're absolutely right that this wouldn't have happened under Gaddafi. Gaddafi was a monstrous dictator in every sense of the term, but like Saddam Hussein and some of these other dictators, they wouldn't tolerate attacks and violence against Christians. Actually, Gaddafi got an award from the Coptic Church for being a defender of the human rights of Christians in Libya. So, he wasn't a nice guy, but, the overthrow of him has led to just some absolute horrors across Libya. I've been, kind of following the story since long before he was murdered. But it also speaks to a broader issue here, and I've written on this extensively as well. I did a cover story about it, on how U.S. foreign policy is resulting in the slaughter of Christians all over the world, in the Middle East, in Africa, and it's just a tragedy, and it wouldn't be happening without the U.S. government's interventionism, and I should say lawless interventionism, because none of these wars are declared by Congress, and so we're going to see a lot more of this. ISIS and Al-Qaeda have been directly or indirectly supported by the U.S. government in recent years. And, going back some decades, Al-Qaeda was, very close to the U.S. government and, in fact, was actually kind of an arm of the U.S. government in Afghanistan. So, it's just unbelievably tragic what's happening to my Christian brothers and, all these innocent people across the Middle East and Africa as a direct result of U.S. foreign policy and the United Nations and the Obama administration.
Yeah, we have reached a point of disagreement, but we will agree to disagree and move on. But I don't think that Muammar Gaddafi was a monster. Was he a dictator? Well, in the technical sense of dictatorships, if you mean an autocratic, supreme authority, but technically or legally, he was recognized as Libya's prime minister. But as I stated, Libya at the time of his overthrow was an ally of the United States government in the war on terror.
That's right.
I think Muammar Gaddafi earns high marks if we want to talk about waging war on terrorism. He was the first to issue arrest warrant for Osama bin Laden, for a couple of African embassies that were blown up in the act of terrorism led to deaths of innocent Africans. And so, we'll move past that point of disagreement. But we do agree that the actions of the United States government was illegal, and facilitating the murder, as you called it, of Gaddafi. So, but you wrote about Hillary Clinton's role as Secretary of State. Certainly we had to bring in Susan Rice, what she was saying on the American news media to sell this, humanitarian mission as they were selling it to get the American people's approval to attack Libya. And so tell us from your perspective, since you've been writing about it, how did we get here, today to where people are being beheaded on the beaches of Libya?
Yeah, it's a long story, and really it starts, since World War II.
We have about 40 minutes. We got about 45 minutes, so however long you want to stay with us, Alex.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Reed. Yeah, so I think one of the places where the United States really went wrong here is when we stopped, following the Constitution. And the Constitution says Congress has the power to declare war. It doesn't give the President the power to declare war. It doesn't give the United Nations the power to declare war. It says Congress. And we haven't had an actual declared war since World War II. So I think that's one of the big problems right there, when you leave so much power in the hands of either the UN, which, as far as I'm concerned, is just a dictator's club and it needs to be abolished, or the presidency. And, Bush did this and Clinton did this, and going back, many presidents have done this, but it's inappropriate. And Obama even took it to the next level, because at least Bush, when he wanted to invade Iraq based on lies, he went to Congress and sought an authorization for the use of military force. Obama didn't even do that. He went to the UN Security Council, presented patently phony evidence, and that's the most recent story I did about Libya. The lies are just literally crumbling all around them. So they presented this patently false information to the UN Security Council, and the UN Security Council purported to authorize military action against Libya. So right away from the very start, I knew it was based on lies. It was well known that it was based on lies. Now that's being confirmed even by the U.S. intelligence community, which, again, is the most recent article I wrote. A whole bunch of, senior intelligence and military people have come out now and said, it was a joke. It was a lie. Gaddafi wasn't planning any kind of genocide. He wasn't planning on massacring civilians. He was trying to put down a rebellion of actual terrorists. The same people that the U.S. government claims it's been fighting for the last 15 years since, the war on terror started. These were the people that had been trying to overthrow Gaddafi for a long time and that had been plotting this. And then the Obama administration and the United Nations kind of did an about-face, and they switched sides in the war on terror. I'm hearing that used more and more, and I think it's an excellent brief summary of what happened here. We've supposedly been fighting Al-Qaeda and all these jihadists all over the world. But then in Libya, it totally flipped around.
You betrayed an ally, like I stated. They betrayed an ally since the Bush administration. So, yeah, I agree with the point that was made. Please continue.
Yeah, and so they did. They backed actual Al-Qaeda people. And I was reporting this, many years ago in 2011, that this rebellion was led by actual Islamists and Al-Qaeda people, literal Al-Qaeda people. It's not just a figure of speech. Like the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, to give you one example, was one of the leadership organizations in this rebellion that was backed by the U.S. government. And the U.S. military, as far back as 2007, identified this group, the LIGF, as an arm of Al-Qaeda, as Al-Qaeda's branch in Libya. So we were funneling weapons and intelligence and providing airstrikes and air cover on behalf of the same exact people who we've supposedly lost thousands of troops and billions and maybe trillions of dollars fighting in the war on terror for the 10 years before. So, it's not surprising what happened. And, once the war got underway, we really started to see the horrifying face of all this. One of the things that I found most ghastly about this was there was an entire town of black Africans living in Libya. The town was called Tawerga, and it was literally wiped off the map. It was ethnic cleansing. It was genocide. The Arab Islamists who wanted to overthrow Gaddafi, they viewed him as an apostate leader. And, maybe he was an apostate according to Islam. I don't know. I'm not an Islamic theologian. But, either way, these Islamist rebels that the Obama administration and the French government and the United Nations went out and literally wiped a town of black off the map. They executed them, they beheaded them, they tortured them, humiliated them, they tied their hands behind their back and forced them to eat Libyan. And this was all based on these, silly lies. Obama administration and other warmongering powers were spreading, that Gaddafi had somehow hired mercenaries from sub-Saharan Africa to come help him genocide civilians, which was patently ridiculous, and it was known to be patently ridiculous at the time. I mean, if I know it, and I can report on it in 2011, certainly the U.S. government knew about it, and now we know that they knew about it. And so now, we see what Libya has turned into today. It's a literal terror state. It has ISIS running all over the place. It has Al-Qaeda. There's rival governments battling it out. They took over the U.S. embassy, these Islamist terrorists, and were swimming in the U.S. embassy swimming pool in Tripoli. So, I mean, the country has descended into absolute barbarity and terrorism, and it's a total mess. And, I mean, you have to feel sorry for the, thousands of innocent people who have been slaughtered as a result of this, ridiculous and unconstitutional intervention in Libya that we know now is based on lies.
And why do you believe, Alex, that there hasn't been any hearings on this? There has only been hearings, and we might have talked about this the last time you were on the program briefly, but there have been hearings on just the attack on the consulate. That resulted in Christopher, what was his name, Stevens or Stevenson?
Yeah, Christopher Stevens, yeah.
Yeah, where he was killed. But they have not been bringing up any of the things that you just mentioned about the United States changing sides, betraying an ally, helping terrorists overthrow a country. We haven't heard any kind of hearings with those sort of tones on it at all. Could it be because, that across the aisle in the Republican Party, you certainly had, those who helped sell this, and people, we could just say John McCain, for example. Hell, he flew over there and took pictures, with some guys that have been identified as being part of this terrorist threat. So, I mean, why aren't we seeing, I guess if I'm boil it down to a question, in your opinion, why aren't we having, Senate hearings, congressional hearings on these issues? They're very important.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head. The Republicans have blood all over their hands as well, not just in Libya, but Libya, in particular, you had John McCain and Lindsey Graham and, conservatives call them rhinos, Republicans in name only. We like to, pretend like they're not part of the Republican Party, but they are. And Republicans, at the upper levels, the leadership of the Republican Party and the leadership of the Democrat Party, they're working for the same thing. To just boil it down, they're out for their own interests. They're building, their dreams, their new world order and all these things, and we're not on their team. So, as far as I'm concerned, we almost live in a one-party state. There are some good Republicans and there are some good Democrats, but at the upper levels, really, it's the same scam, and that's why we never see any change in policy when we go from president to president. We had Bush. He was engaged in all this warmongering and infinite war and don't have to ask Congress for a declaration of war. And then Obama takes it and speeds it all up. So, I think that's probably the biggest reason is that there's blood on everybody's hands here. And the Republicans know that, if they start holding hearings on all this kind of stuff, there's going to be a lot of dirty laundry being aired. The same reason. Why aren't we doing something about Fast and Furious? Why was Eric Holder sending, advanced military weaponry to Mexican drug cartels and then lying about it under oath, and we don't do anything about it? I mean, we have some sham hearings, and, okay, that's the end of it, and it just disappears, and the news covers it up.
I think that's why he's retiring, Alex. If I could just interject there. In my analysis, I believe that's why he's retiring, because his announcement came following a judge ruling that, they couldn't keep documents secret. They had to turn them over, make them public through whatever the records request. And so I believe that's why he is retiring. So, rather than face prosecution or go through further hearings or any charges, he's just going to retire, and ride off into the sunset. But what about also the DEA, under, what's her name? Miss Michelle Leonhardt, who runs the DEA. What about them cutting deals with the, Sinaloa drug cartel, allowing them to, smuggle tons of drugs into Chicago, that distributed out to other urban cities, from Chicago. And, two of the brothers, who, pled guilty to their role in it, billions of dollars, tons of cocaine. We know probably guns involved as well for the Sinaloa drug cartel. They only got 14 years, and it went no higher. You know, what about Michelle Leonhardt? She is the one who cut a deal to allow them, this immunity, or we'll look the other way. If you feed us information on your rival drug cartels, we'll allow you to do it. That's a crime. So, are anyone talking about that on, let's say, the right side of the aisle, conservatives, libertarians, anybody talking about that? In addition to Fast and Furious?
I've been all over this cooperation between the U.S. government and the drug cartels for many years. The DEA was busted at helping drug terrorists and the drug cartels launder money in the United States. We know they've been arming them. A lot of this stuff was done under the supposed guise of investigation. We're investigating somebody, so we have to make nice with drug dealers and terrorists and so on. And then, when you really scratch beneath the surface, you see that that's a hoax too. Like the Fast and Furious was really a perfect example of it, because they said, we're trafficking the guns into Mexico to see where they would go and, arrest higher up people. And, that turned out to be false as well. The two people that were supposedly being quote unquote investigated ended up being FBI assets who were described as untouchable. So, why are you going to investigate an FBI asset who cannot be prosecuted, who cannot be touched? It doesn't make any sense. I think we're really just scratching the surface here in terms of the U.S. government's involvement with both terrorism and drug trafficking.
Scratching the surface, indeed. I want to play this clip. Let me see, what time is it? Okay, yeah, I want to play this clip. This is like, I've only seen glimpses of, the truth about, or serious questions being asked about what has happened in Libya, whether or not it was legal to, smart or, against international law, U.S. law, Constitution, all of that. The only I think this might be like Rand Paul, who's himself been mentioned as a possible 2016 candidate, although I think people been trying to give it to Jeb Bush. But yeah, he gave a news interview. I believe it was on Fox. We're going to play a clip from that where he questions Hillary, over what occurred there. And we're going to listen to that. And then I want to get, your further analysis on Hillary Clinton. Should she be disqualified, or should she be facing any charges, criminal charges, for what occurred there? Certainly, we had to ask the question of the Democratic Party, do you really want to put a war criminal up as your 2016 nominee? Come on, these are logical questions that need to be asked. So let's roll this clip.
Because I asked people on Twitter to submit questions for you. NH Yank, he wants to know, how would you deal with violence here and abroad if you were elected president?
I think the biggest thing is, like Hillary's war in Libya was a huge disaster. Not only are we more at risk from attacks from radical Islam because they toppled Gaddafi's government, we sent an awful message to Iran. Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons. We promised we wouldn't get rid of him, and then we did. So what kind of message does that send to Iran if they were to give up their nuclear weapons, which we want them to do? You wonder why they might be a little bit wary of that after they saw what happened to Gaddafi. So Hillary's war was a disaster in Libya. There are weapons everywhere, jihadists everywhere. But it was also a disaster on the international stage because it sent a terrible message to Iran.
On this video, that was where the jihadists murdering Gaddafi, and they're playing with his body right now. You can't see this. And it's
that is the land of unconfirmed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, I'm sure it did.
I think that was Hillary Clinton making a Caesar reference. We came, this woman is, in my opinion, a sociopath. Man. Alex, what do you think about what Rand Paul said? I mean, he even, mentioned the fact that, hey, maybe Iran you might want to give them second thought or pause on whether or not they want to develop nuclear weapons or give up any of their rights.
Yeah, and it's absolutely true. I mean, we sent just a terrible message around the world with this unconstitutional war on Libya. I mean, we essentially said to our allies, hey, you can't trust us. We might turn against you at a moment's notice, and then have our, jihadist allies, Al-Qaeda on the ground, sodomize you and murder you. So, I mean, first of all, that's a terrible message to send to your allies. I mean, it's a terrible message to send to your enemies, right? We'll fight you for who knows how many years in Iraq and exterminate the Christian population there, and then suddenly, we're going to like you a lot better, and we're going to send you weapons and give you air support to overthrow another government that we don't like. And, certainly Iran is paying attention here, and, the whole world is paying attention here. This sent a number of extremely troubling signals, I think, to the world. And, the last little sound bit that you played there, Hillary Clinton's ghoulish cackling about, quoting a bastardized version of the Roman emperor's quote. It's just frightening that we live in a world now where that is seen as something that's, even maybe not tolerable, but it happens and it's accepted. These people need to be on trial. They violated the Constitution. Hillary Clinton apparently specifically told Congress there's nothing you can do to stop our war in Libya. The UN authorized it. So we've sent a number of very bad signals to the rest of the world, to oppressed populations around the world, to the people who are being massacred by, the Obama administration's allies in Libya, Al-Qaeda and ISIS and these others. Same thing going on in Syria. It's just, absolutely, absolutely horrifying. And, if I was a dictator, I would say, okay, well, then I guess I need nuclear weapons, and I guess, I can never trust the United States government. And that's exactly the message that they sent.
Loud and clear. People are listening. Now I want to ask you about a unrelated story to the Clintons, but this is breaking news, and this is kind of unprecedented in terms of my Fox News watching or watchdogging, so to speak. But about this what's his name? This businessman, this Saudi businessman being connected to Al-Qaeda. They reported on that last night, and I want to run that clip and get your thoughts on it, Alan, and also any other listeners that want to call in, even if you want to comment on something that Sister Ophelia Wangaza brought up about that report about Venezuela and the 13th Amendment, the United States being put under view for the 13th Amendment legalizing slavery, or you want to talk about the current topics that we're discussing with Mr. Newman, you can call us at 530-881-1400. The access code is 549-032#. For those already on the line, just hit *6 on your phone keypad and then the number 1. Let me go ahead and run this clip. It's very interesting. And this is Fox News reporting about someone who owns News Corp, which News Corp owns Fox News.
A former operative for Al-Qaeda says prominent members of Saudi Arabia's royal family have been major donors to terrorist causes. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen looks at the explosive allegations from one of 9/11's infamous figures.
In sworn statements at the Supermax prison where he's serving a life sentence for terrorism, Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker in the 9/11 plot, testified in October that Saudi Arabia's government prior to 9/11 directly financed the operations of Al-Qaeda. A French native and Arabic speaker who studied finance in London, Moussaoui recalled building a database of Al-Qaeda donors. I remember many of them, Moussaoui testified, because some of them were known within the circle of the Mujahideen, some of them extremely famous, like Walid bin Talal, Prince Turki al-Faisal, and Prince Bandar bin Sultan. Those three men are, respectively, a leading Saudi businessman and major investor in the parent company of this network, the Saudi intelligence minister at the time, and the Saudi ambassador to the U.S. at the time. The Saudi prince, Abdullah, Moussaoui testified, referring to the future king whose 10-year reign ended with his death last month. He was a new prince at the time, They'll give $2-3 million. Moussaoui also recalled hand-delivering letters from Osama bin Laden to those Saudi royals and to the man who is now King Salman.
I'm not inclined to believe the word of a convicted terrorist who was involved in the September 11th attacks. But, Gretchen, there's one thing we do know, and that is that Saudi Arabia has been funding the schools, the Wahhabist fundamentalist schools across the Islamic world.
Moussawi's testimony was taken by lawyers for 9/11 families who are suing the Saudi government for damages. The Saudi embassy called Moussawi deranged and noted his own attorneys argued he was incompetent, although the federal judge in Moussawi's terrorism trial ruled him extremely intelligent. The embassy also quoted the 9/11 Commission, which found, quote, no evidence that the Saudi government as an institution or senior Saudi officials individually funded al-Qaeda. But some U.S. officials who served on the 9/11 Commission and on a joint House-Senate inquiry into 9/11 remain deeply suspicious of Riyadh. Former Senator Bob Graham, a veteran of the joint inquiry, said the kingdom is mistaken in its claim that the government of Saudi Arabia has been fully exonerated of any culpability for the events of September 11, 2001 by the 9/11 Commission or any other investigation. I am convinced, Graham added, that there was a direct line between at least some of the terrorists who carried out the September 11th attacks and the government of Saudi Arabia. And former Senator Bob Kerry of the 9/11 Commission said evidence relating to the plausible involvement of possible Saudi government agents in the September 11th attacks has never been fully pursued.
We continue to maintain strong counterterrorism cooperation with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Our mutual cooperation includes information sharing about shared threats from al-Qaeda and other violent extremist groups.
Moussawi also detailed his life inside al-Qaeda, including the time when bin Laden's mother came to visit. Spending a week at his base in Afghanistan, she was greeted with a banquet and the festive firing of Russian machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. Brett?
James, thank you.
All right, so that was Fox News reporting on one of its investors. Among those include members of the Saudi royal family, but this billionaire Saudi businessman described as a great friend of Rupert Murdoch. They probably be having dinner at each other's houses and, you know, Skyping and all of that. But, I mean, wow, Alex, it seems to me like, you know, the Saudis was doing the same thing that we just got through talking about the United States government doing, working with terrorists, funding terrorists. I have read reports about Saudis providing that poison gas that was used in Syria. You know, that, financing that, also issuing threats to Russia about attacking their Winter Olympics. So, I mean, what do you think about, I mean, that's like a bombshell report, you know, Fox News reporting on one of his principal investors of his network and these ties to 9/11. You know, we, like you mentioned earlier, you wouldn't overthrew Saddam, whether you agree with his style of government or not, what he was practicing. You know, he was not, you know, killing these. He did not have an involvement in 9/11, but we wouldn't, you know, we said that he did. So, but you know, Saudi links. I think that has long been written about, you know, to the people who allegedly committed this act. But now we got Moussawi, and people want to act like, oh, he's crazy. Don't listen to him. But yeah, look the other way. What are your thoughts, Alex?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, there's no doubt that the Saudi government has been deeply involved with al-Qaeda, going all the way back to the beginning, actually. If you look at the origins of al-Qaeda, right. It comes from the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. There was, the CIA and other U.S. government agencies in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, and a number of other governments were financing and supporting literally the very worst elements of the opposition to the Soviet occupation there. Now, you know, I would say fighting Soviet occupation is a great thing, but there's a lot more than meets the eye going on here. And that's really was the genesis of al-Qaeda. I mean, that's where it came from. Osama bin Laden was involved with this. He was a Saudi, and, there's no question that the Saudis were involved. And I think there's also no question that we still don't know the full truth about what happened on 9/11. Many of the 9/11 Commission study group, whatever, when many of the members of that board have said the same thing. We didn't give all the information. We didn't get all the information. So there's a lot of questions that need to be asked there. Certainly, I think Saudi Arabia has had involvement with and continues to have involvement with jihadist terrorists. And, this has been essentially admitted by Vice President Joe Biden and by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. General Dempsey, they've both said in recent months that a number of Arab, quote-unquote, anti-ISIS allies of Obama have been supporting and funding and arming ISIS. So, this goes back decades, and it continues right up to the present day. Virtually all of the terrorism in the world today, if you trace it back, has its roots in governments, whether that be in Moscow, and, a lot of the Islamic terrorism does have its roots in Moscow. And a lot of it has its roots in Washington, D.C., and a lot of it has its roots in Riyadh. And it's still going on. The U.S. government has even said some of these things, like the people we're supposedly fighting in Afghanistan, the Taliban and various terrorist groups, are being openly supported by the government of Pakistan, like the Lashkar-e-Taiba organization that I think murdered 100 and something people in one attack in India. The senior U.S. officials have openly said in congressional testimony that this terrorist organization is being supported by the government of Pakistan. We're sending $5 billion a year to the government of Pakistan. What is going on here? If it wasn't for governments, there would be very little terrorism going on right now. Now, that's not to downplay Islamic extremism and so on. But, if we just look at the Christians, we get an interesting picture of what's going on there. In Iraq, there was millions of Christians during Saddam Hussein. They were protected. Some of them served in his regime. And now there's virtually none. They've essentially been cleansed, exterminated, and chased out of the country. A lot of them went to Syria, and now, the powers that be have their little terrorist allies there, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, ISIS, etc., and they're exterminating the Christians in Syria. So this is going on all over the place, and, contrary to the narrative that's being pushed by the media that these are just lone Islamic extremists motivated by Islamic extremism, there's much, much more to the picture that we're not being told.
I would certainly agree. Now we're getting, so-called experts. There was an ABC News report. I'm going to see if I can quote the guy. Let me see. Chris Chivas, Associate Director of International Security and Defense Policy Center, and a senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation. Yeah, that's what made me remember it. But he's saying, it's a bad idea to go into Libya now, but I was like, it's a bad idea to have, attacked it in the first place and used these terrorist proxies. But, President Obama is seeking, authorization, Bush sought authorization to attack Iraq. He's seeking authorization now to do something about what's going on, in several countries, Iraq, Syria, and, Libya as well. And he's seeking that authorization, but I'm like, this is a Hegelian dialect, a perfect example of it. You created the problem. Now you coming to the people and saying you got the solution to the problem that you created. And it's just enough. And, I think that this keeps happening. You mentioned a lot, decades. This has been going on from president to president, decades. How many of them ever get prosecuted for crimes? And so we have to look at Congress. We had to look at the judicial system as all being complicit in these crimes by not prosecuting anyone. They're prosecuting people, but I think the guy's name is Jeffrey Skilling, who came forth as a whistleblower on the CIA torture program. And he's the only one that's facing prosecution, looking at 100 years, for revealing this. So, that's on us as a people, or people that want to say that we're a nation of laws and whatnot. Well, these people aren't being held accountable. And that's why it continues. You can get prosecuted for having a dime bag of weed in your pocket, but, go torture somebody in the name of, foreign policy, and you're good to go. Your thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. It's grotesque, actually, how many war criminals and criminals of all varieties have gotten off scot-free. The Obama administration, one of the first things they did was say, okay, we're not going to prosecute any of the Bush administration officials that approved the torture, that engaged in the torture. Just like you said, instead, they're going after the whistleblowers who are telling the people about this kind of stuff. So we live in a bizarro world now where the criminals are, holding all the levers of power, and, the people who try to do something about it are the ones who are getting locked up and getting into big trouble. So, we absolutely need to do something about it. And now there's an interesting movement going along with this. Now they're saying, well, let's prosecute them at the UN's court. And, I can think of few worse ideas than allowing the UN's kangaroo court to prosecute Americans, whether, it's Bush or Obama or anybody. They need to be prosecuted here. They need to be afforded constitutional protections. I know that they're not big fans of juries. Obama thinks he can order drone assassinations of anyone he wants anywhere in the world. But they deserve due process. They should be prosecuted here with a proper jury of their peers. And, it's the only way we're going to put an end to this stuff. People need to be held accountable for the war crimes and for launching wars based on lies without constitutional authority. If nothing happens, if nobody gets held accountable, it's just going to continue going on. And they've terrified the whistleblowers now. People are so scared to speak out. People are so scared to share the information that they have because they think that they're going to be locked up, forever or for many years. The Obama administration is using the Espionage Act to prosecute whistleblowers who are telling the people this kind of information. I mean, it's just grotesque and really absurd. We need to get busy on this because, if they keep going with this, it's going to end, very, very badly for Americans and for the rest of the world too.
Oh, Alex, I want to take a short break, and then on the other side of the break, I want to shift gears for a minute because the last time I spoke to you, we touched also briefly about jury nullification, and I got a jury nullification story I want to share with the listeners, and I want to get your thoughts on it as well. So are you good to go on time? Can you hang with us through the break?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. You're listening to Black Talk Radio News with Scotty Reed, broadcasting every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, right here, part of the Black Talk Radio Network, 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to hear from one of our media partners, Tanya Free and Friends. They come on Wednesdays, 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern, right here on, again, the Black Talk Radio Network. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Once again, Black Talk Radio News. Today's date is February 17th, 2015. Now, this story is about jury nullification, something that we preach on New Abolitionist Radio, which will be on air at 8 o'clock p.m. Wednesday night. But we have talked about this in terms of modern day slavery and human trafficking under the 13th Amendment, slavery as punishment for crime. Corporations profit, most certainly, the states and the federal government profits, and they use these laws like drug laws. It goes back decades, as Alex has said, it goes back decades. But there is a current case. It's called the Kettle Falls 5 case, which involves a family of medicinal marijuana patients who are facing federal drug charges, and the prosecutor is worried that the jury will ignore the law and vote to acquit the defendants in order to send a social message, according to a motion filed by U.S. attorneys on February 10th. So this happened about a week ago. What they're trying to do, let me just read this portion. The motion also really doesn't want the defense or anyone else to talk about medical marijuana during court proceedings. Medical marijuana remains illegal under federal law, even though 23 states, including Washington, legitimize its use. Because the case is in a federal court, the defendants aren't allowed to discuss medical marijuana at all, giving the prosecution a straight shot at putting the family in jail for possibly 10 years each, where they can go and answer phone calls for Verizon, AT&T, break down products for Walmart, and participate in become slaves in the system. The Kettle Falls 5 case. This is in Washington State. Your thoughts on this in terms of citizens using this? And I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not even going to get into this motion that was filed. I don't think the defense is directly wanting to present a nullification case, so to speak, but apparently the prosecution is afraid of that. Alex, your thoughts?
That sounds like a really interesting case. I hadn't heard about it before just now, but, there seems to be two nullifications at work here. The first one is the state of Washington saying, hey, we're going to nullify federal laws purporting to ban, medical marijuana and marijuana in general. And I think that's something that the states really need to start doing. And you know, I don't recommend people smoke marijuana. I don't think it's a good thing. But I've been very encouraged to see states finally standing up and saying, hey, you know what, we're not going to obey these, you know, silly federal laws. There's no constitutional authority to make them in the first place. I mean, that's why we needed a constitutional amendment to ban alcohol, because the government does not have the authority to ban or prohibit or regulate substances like that. And the second issue of the jury nullification, I think, is key, too. You know, going back to the very earliest, you know, the founding of the United States, there's always been this concept that juries have the right to judge not just the facts in the case, but also the law. You know, if the federal government passes some kind of law, say, you know, directly violating somebody's rights, so, you know, say they want to censor newspapers, or they want to restrict the right to keep and bear arms, or they want to, you know, just any right, then juries have an obligation to set their fellow citizens free, regardless of what the unconstitutional statute says. And the fact that the prosecutor in this case is trying to interfere with the jury's knowledge and ability to learn this knowledge, I think is a testament to how downward this nation has gone from its original roots. I mean, nullification has always been with us in American history. You know, going back to the earliest founding fathers, the earliest presidents, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, both used state nullification against the Alien and Sedition Acts. They said, no, the federal government doesn't have the power to pass this kind of law, and so it's not going to be valid in this state. And then jury nullification, I mean, that goes even back before the founding of the United States. When we established juries, juries have always had the right, and this has been recognized by the Supreme Court and the federal courts and basically every credible legal theorist out there. You know, juries are not obliged to convict just because the federal government passed some unconstitutional law and is prosecuting somebody under it. And this would apply in cases like where the Obama administration is trying to persecute these whistleblowers under the Espionage Act. You know, juries should say, no, that's ridiculous. This man is not a spy. You don't have the authority to be prosecuting a whistleblower. We're going to set him free. And, you know, the same thing in this case. And the fact that the Department of Justice is worried about it, I think is a good sign on one hand, but on the other hand, it's really worrying that we now have a government that is directly trying to mislead the jury about its authority and its power. I mean, juries are really absolutely crucial to liberty in the United States. And, you know, I feel bad for people who live in countries without jury systems. They're really the ultimate check on government authority, because without the permission of your peers, without your peers saying, yes, this man is guilty and belongs in jail, the government cannot put you in jail. So, you know, now we're seeing open efforts to go around that. The Obama administration and Congress, actually, in this case, with the NDAA, they said, you know, the military can detain people, including American citizens, indefinitely with no criminal charges, with no prosecution, with no access to a lawyer, with no access to a court. So, I mean, we're entering dangerous territory here. The jury is really the final check that we have on abuses by government. And the fact that they want to cover up the power of the jury and they want to mislead the jury, it almost sounds like jury tampering to me, which is a crime, because they're not giving the jury all the facts that they need to make a decision in the case.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Alex, you got anything in works that you're working on right now? When can people get your next report, and tell them how they can follow you on social media and read what you're writing about?
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Mr. Reed. I mean, my latest report I just cleared out today is about UN, they call them peacekeepers, but really they should be called war makers, abusing and brutalizing and raping children in Haiti. And, you know, I focused in on Haiti for this specific article, but it's going on all over the world. Any country under UN occupation is dealing with this kind of stuff. Haiti happens to be close to us, and it's just an absolute tragedy what's going on down there. People can find my work at thenewamerican.com or WND.com. I've published in a lot of other magazines around the world, so if people Google my name, they can find it. On Twitter, I just started a Twitter account, and I don't really know how to use it yet, but I'm learning. It's Alex Newman _JOU. And then I'm on Facebook and all those other things. So if people want to find me, they can get to me, and my email address is at the bottom of most of my articles, so people can contact me if they need to.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to reading and, you know, analyzing your article and what you're writing about. And, you know, I do appreciate the service you provide in, you know, being blatant and honest about the truth, you know, in terms of especially foreign policy of what the government, U.S. government is doing, and many of its allies like Saudi Arabia. and, not looking at it in a partisan issue because, like you said, they're working for the same thing. It's really a one-party system. So, that we can agree on. So, we appreciate your work in those efforts.
Hey, well, thank you so much for having me, Mr. Reed. I appreciate your efforts as well. And until next time, huh?
All right. Peace and blessings
Thanks.
to you.
Bye-bye.